Well, greetings, friends, fellow West Texans. It's Jodey here, happily connecting with you throughout the district, 29 counties, and the best, hardest-working, God-fearing, freedom-loving people in all the land, and I mean it. I'm so proud to represent you and your families and your communities, and sometimes, while I want to get through this crisis, the health crisis and the economic ensuing crisis if we don't respond quickly, I want to get through this as quickly as anyone else, and we need to make sure we do everything we can at every level of government and every level of society to get through it. I got to tell you, sometimes a crisis brings out the very best in our community, and neighbor helping neighbor, churches, nonprofits, seeing my local leaders step up and do the very tough things that need to be done to provide some intense precautions right now in the immediate, just so we can work as a country to get through this without a major domestic crisis by inundating the health system with folks who are severely sick from this COVID-19. But there's just so many things to cover. And I just want to thank you, first of all, for the honor of representing you in our nation's capital. Secondly, thanks for your time tonight. I know you all are, you've got a lot on your mind, and I know this is very stressful for a lot of folks. I know there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. When you're dealing with something this unprecedented, and when you're going through uncharted territory with a novel virus that doesn't have a vaccine to prevent it. It doesn't have a therapy, at least at this point, to treat it. And so it's unnerving, and I understand that completely. Let's also keep in perspective the fact that the majority of people who have contracted this virus have had low to no symptoms, and that's a blessing. And we need to make sure again that we keep that in perspective. The folks who are the most vulnerable, obviously, are the elderly and those with underlying health conditions. And in many ways, it's our parents and our grandparents that we're looking after, and that we're making some sacrifices to make sure that we don't endanger, again, the most vulnerable among us. I can just kind of frame this up in many ways, but I'll take it from the emergency response and preparedness and then move out to the current legislation being considered in the Senate that is a whopping $2 trillion, and it is significant. Not just in the price tag, but in the necessary resources to get to our families and to our small businesses and communities and hospitals that are really stressed, if not just flat out getting pummeled and hammered by the fact that there's almost no economic activity. And the small guys are taking it on the chin and taking it the hit probably harder than any other of our job creators, and they make up half of the jobs in this country, and certainly the preponderance of jobs in West Texas and rural areas. Let me interject here before walking through the framework. Press *3 if you have a question, and that's how you get into the queue. We'll try to flip through these questions pretty quickly. But I'm not going to do poll questions tonight because there's so much ground to cover. Let me go as quickly as I can, and then I'll drill down according to your questions and let you guide the conversation. The initial response, I guess my thoughts on that are as follows. The president's early decision and swift and bold decision, I might say at the time, to restrict travel really bought us some time. And it might have been a little controversial at the time. it was exactly the right thing to do. And then screen folks at airports and then quarantine those who were sick or had the symptoms or tested positive with COVID-19. But I also would tell you that I think we're having to respond in an extreme way at this juncture, certainly for a short time, God willing, because we also had challenges with respect to the supply chain and the shortage of testing materials and personal protective equipment. And while I know the president has marshaled all resources, public and private, to help with the supply chain issues, and while I know he has cut through red tape and has streamlined, for example, the FDA approval of diagnostics. Now I think we're into the second diagnostic, which is a 24-hour turnaround. We've got vaccine trials that are active today. All of that's moving very expeditiously, but when your supply chain has, over the many years, if not decades, been structured to the low-cost producer, and it ends up being in China, and in some ways, whether it's China or any other sole source provider, we become dependent on other countries for very important, if not issues of national security, and that's a problem. And I think this highlights why we don't want to outsource our food supply, why we want to maintain the capacity to build war machines and make strategic metals, and certainly medicine and medical supplies and other critical equipment and materials have to be more intentionally designed so that we have a free enterprise system, so that we have free trade, but that we also maintain the capacity stateside to make things that are important to our citizens and to our country. So that has been a challenge, and I do think it's caused us to have to take some pretty extreme measures here over the last couple of weeks, and probably for the next week to 2 weeks going forward. Now, everybody I know has gotten the word to take an abundance of caution, practice good hygiene, don't get around large crowds. I know that, and to isolate, certainly if you're sick or someone in your family is. And I know the mayors and local officials all across West Texas have done everything that they believe is prudent and that is in keeping with the safety and health of their citizens. And I know going forward, and I would just say I have strong feelings that we're going to need to return to normal as quickly as possible and to get folks back to work and in the marketplace and try to recover economically from the things that we had to do in order to prevent what is happening in Italy or what is happening in New York. And it's a disaster, and it is a true full-blown crisis. So I want to thank my local leaders. I know they get some flack on all sides of this, but they're doing everything that they know to do, and they're trying to follow also the leadership of Governor Abbott and President Trump and the healthcare experts. Folks, it is a very delicate balance to manage the risks related to health and safety of our citizens and the economic viability of this country. We are in a tight squeeze. We're in a hunkered down posture, but we're going to start to relax that in the near term, and then there comes the part where we as the federal government must help provide bridge assistance, temporary targeted bridge assistance, liquidity, cash flow for local small businesses who, by no fault of their own, have been just wiped out because they have no customers, they've got no revenue, and they need this infusion in the short term of cash to meet payroll, pay rent, and other business expenses. And I'll talk about those programs But the first phase was the $8 billion from Congress to support the expediting of developing vaccines and treatments, the support of the administration as they work to contain and mitigate the spread. And then, of course, there was the no one's going to pay for testing component of that. The second tranche of resources and the second legislative initiative was focused on paid medical and family leave for our workers and their families in the event that they were directly or indirectly affected by the virus. In some cases, the indirect result was their kids were home and they needed somebody to stay and take care of the kids. So on a temporary basis, there have been provisions made for that. And then the third phase is the big one. It is focused on a few things. It's the liquidity for businesses of all sizes, because quite frankly, we're a nation that has businesses of all sizes. And very bluntly, all sizes of businesses employ millions of Americans that need their jobs. They need to go back to their jobs. They need to stay connected to their jobs, because the quickest way to rebound and to return to normal and to get back to that wonderful place of economic growth and new opportunities and a bright future for this country is to keep our people connected to their job and have that continuity of employment at all levels, all levels. So there's SBA lending programs that are streamlined, $350 billion for that particular program for small businesses. That's the lifeblood of West Texas and rural regions and economies like ours. You've got the Treasury fund that's essentially for distressed industries, like the travel industry, the airlines in particular, and have been devastated, and that's obviously a national security issue. These are loans that will be paid back. These are loans to provide short-term liquidity. And then on the SBA front, there are opportunities for small businesses to, and there are incentives built into the SBA loans, whereby a portion of those loans will be forgiven if you maintain employment and retain your employees. To the extent you do that, you can keep some of that as a grant instead of a loan. These are 4% interest rate, 100% guaranteed by the government, and that needs to get out yesterday, because people are suffering and struggling, and we're losing jobs every day, and we'll have millions of people out of work, which brings me to another component of our support, $250 billion to basically expand and enhance or strengthen the safety net for those who don't make it, who can't stay connected because their employer becomes insolvent, goes out of business, and they have to provide for their family. That unemployment insurance program has been expanded to include the gig economy workers, those self-employed individuals, independent contractors, state and local employees, government employees, nonprofits. So and this is temporary. This is not permanent. This is through the end of the year, this expansion, where we will pick up everyone in the economy that's been hurt, that has a family, and that has bills to pay. And we don't want them to suffer with no hope and no support and lifeline to get from here to that better place in the next few months to several months. We do not want a sustained recession. I guarantee the cost of a recession that goes out multiple years will be tremendously expensive on the social service side, among other things. Let me also say real quick about the unemployment insurance. It's going to be also, as I said, not just expand the net, but strengthen it. Workers who are laid off for the first few months. Now I think they expanded to 4. So for the first 4 months, we will add an additional. And again, we're going through the text right now, guys. So this is a moving target. So don't hold me to all of this, but I've got about 95% certainty about the things I'm telling you. But again, things are being negotiated in the Senate. I haven't voted on it, but there'll be a plus up of at least $300 per week. So let's just say on average, you make $300 a week on unemployment. We add another $300 on top of that for 4 months to get folks through this major disruption and to the other side, and hopefully back fully employed before they even get to that 4 months. There are tax relief provisions, payroll tax deferrals. On top of deferring payroll taxes for businesses, which is a huge deal, you have 100% expensing of business interest. Actually, that's not right. 50% goes from 30 to 50% of business expensing. And then another provision is net operating losses. You can go back for a few years, take your net operating losses, and get credit for that in 2020. So all of those tax provisions that I mentioned, they equal about $500 billion in cash flow to our small businesses. And cash flow and the speed of which we can inject this liquidity to these small businesses is absolutely critical to their survival. They'll pay much of that back. We will give forgiveness on the portion that they will keep their employees, and I think that's a good incentive to keep America working and keep America employed. So let me pause there and say that *3 is your way to get in the queue and ask a question. Again, press *3 for your questions. Guys, there's a lot of monies, $100 billion in the bill for hospitals and other providers. Obviously very stressed, the system. Lots of our hospitals are struggling. I talked to one the last couple of days that's furloughing employees because they can't do elective surgeries. That's where they make their money. And so they're having to lay off frontline healthcare professionals. We've got $100 billion for the hospital and provider infrastructure, and there's a whole list of things that I think I should just pause at this point. Obviously, I haven't talked about agriculture, energy, and wow, the price of oil and what that's doing to stress the oil and gas industry. What that has potential to do to the economy of West Texas is absolutely devastating. But again, I'll end with this, and then I'll take your questions. We'll get through it, and we just, America's seen a lot of challenges, and they've gone through a lot of rough patches. They've had to make sacrifices. They've had to do some tough things. Leaders have had to make tough decisions, and we've prevailed, and we've been resilient, and we will be resilient in this case. It will be no exception, and it will be because every American is rolling up their sleeves, doing all that they can do, and that we're doing some extraordinary things for this extraordinary and unprecedented crisis. And it's all being done so we can get back to where we were, which was a pretty, I would say it was historically strong economy, and things were going very well. But you know what? You can't control everything, and there's some lessons there as well. God bless West Texas. And now I'll just take your comments and your questions. Mr. Garcia from Abilene.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. My question is in regard to what President Trump was saying either yesterday or the day before in the news as far as him wanting the country to be open back and by Eastern Day. In my opinion, I think that's too soon, basically, given everything that we're going through. If there was a bill that was come up for us to open the country that soon, what side will you take on it?
Mr. Garcia, thank you, and I appreciate that question. Obviously, there's no perfect science. There's no model that's going to give us the perfect answer on when we need to come out of this and begin to recalibrate the balance between the precautions we take for health and safety with respect to the virus and the spread versus the tremendous negative adverse impact on our economy because of the lockdown. I think that it's my opinion, and again, we'll have to let the data drive it. We're not going to make this. We shouldn't make it political. We shouldn't make it emotional. We should let the data drive it and the science and facts that we know. But I think that if we can just get through the next week to 2 weeks and get through this window where we could potentially see great peaks that it would inundate the system, I think we've got to start recalibrating that balance in a smart way. That is, New York is going to be on lockdown for a while. New York is they're at ground zero in terms of crisis from this COVID-19. Now, there are parts of West Texas that have, 2 here, 5 there. Some of the larger population centers, have more than others, although Hockley County has 5. And you've got Dimmitt with 3 or 4. And so, I mean, but those are manageable. And there's only one that I'm aware of that's hospitalized at this point. We have about 33 total cases. So if you got one hospitalized, even if you went up to 100 cases, and I suspect we will continue to go up, we have capacity. If you looked in the Wall Street Journal, you see the 240-bed capacity there in Lubbock. Every hospital is ready, and the local leaders, I've talked to many of our CEOs of the rural hospitals and those facilities and provider groups in Lubbock and Abilene, and everybody is ready, and they are engaged, and they are doing better every day, like the drive-through testing that's happening in the district now. I do think there's a little bit of a concern about PPEs and making sure that the protective gear is there for our frontline workers. But Mr. Garcia, I think we just need to let the data drive it. But one thing's for sure, we need to learn our lessons from this as a nation. And we need to make sure that we deal with the supply chain problems that are choking off these supplies that we desperately need, that have forced us to take a more aggressive posture so that we don't have to lock the economy down to the extent we have, because it's going to cost trillions. I mean, we have a $2 trillion bill on top of a $100 billion bill, and this is probably not the last piece of legislation that's going to be targeted at helping us get back. But yeah, we need to be careful. And I also want to say I want to defer to the local leaders, because every community is different, and some communities will be tailing off when some are still trying to manage a peak number of cases. So the president would like to move out of this quickly, so would I, and I do think we need to reevaluate in the time frame he mentioned. We'll see. Again, prayerfully, and I say that sincerely, we need to pray that this will pass, that we'll manage it, control it, it will tail off, and we get back to normal. Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Press *6 to subscribe to our e-newsletter. The reason I put the plug in for our e-newsletter is because that is the way we keep our constituents informed as to the various things going on here in Washington so that you can better engage with me and have more information to decide where you have concerns. And so *6 to get on our e-newsletter. Let's go to the next question, and then I want to talk about a few folks from the district that are doing some really extraordinary things in service to our community in these very difficult days. I think I've got, I'm waiting here, Miss Vicki Keller from Ransom Canyon. I love Ransom Canyon. What a beautiful place.
Yes, it's been a very wildlife-filled day today, Congressman. We've seen road runners, wild turkeys, and a fox today.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, but Congressman, to give you some background, my husband is over 35 years in the aviation industry. Started out, worked his way up, was a mechanic, became a maintenance rep, and now is quality control. And, we've already had the phone calls with United where the merit increase that these guys all worked their tails off for, April 1st, off the table. Promotions, off the table. And the latest is discussions of pay cuts. And I know that you're a parent, and we are having our daughter getting married. And when you talk about pay cuts, you go into panic. We've been through pay cuts before with Continental Airlines when management said, oh, don't worry, it's only 3 to 5%, and it became 10. Can you shed any light and give this mom some relief as to what relief is going to be given to the aviation industry?
I sure can. I just want to say first, I know everybody, Vicki, is you're expressing the stress that I think so many on the call would articulate if they could get into the queue, and that's the children are home from school's out, they're trying to homeschool, they're trying to decide if they're going to get their husband or even their wife or both are going to have their jobs when this is all said and done. That's why this bridge funding is so critical to get out ASAP. And that funding is that $350 billion for the small businesses, 500 employees and below, and then for the airline industry, I think it's so critical to moving people and product, and so critical to our nation's security that there's a $25 billion of the $500 billion roughly is for the airline industry. That's the passenger side. There's some for the cargo as well. So there's a carve out for the airline industry. Now these aren't grants. They're guarantees with the Federal Reserve or direct low interest rate loans from the Treasury. But the point is they'll be paid back, but we don't want our airline industry to collapse. And quite frankly, for no fault of, I've heard people say this is a bailout. Now listen, I'm going to say that the price tag is too much, and I'm uncomfortable with the size of the resources that we put on this, but we negotiated with the Democrats in the Senate and the House, Republicans in the House and Senate. It's just not going to be perfect. And one of the imperfections for me is that it's too much money. The other piece of it is it's not the framework. I think but in terms of the bailout, let me get to that. Guys, these bailout during the financial crisis and where business people, Wall Street and investors made bad decisions, and then we all suffered as a result. That was different. I would have opposed that. I would have said the shareholders need to take the hit for that, and that these companies need to fail and learn their lesson and work that trouble through the system to the extent you can make people responsible for those decisions, so you don't create moral hazard. Moral hazard is where you intervene and you don't allow for that responsibility and accountability, and it encourages people to do it again and again. I oppose that. But this is a natural disaster. This is a crisis. We're in a national emergency. And these companies did not make bad decisions, and it was the government at every level saying we need to get out of the marketplace, we need to hunker down, we need to isolate, and we need to be careful about how we interact. And those decisions by the government, as a result of this national emergency/crisis, is why these folks are in the position they're in. And if we don't step in to provide lending liquidity, we will rue the day we didn't, because we will have a sustained recession. We will have millions of Americans on unemployment and on food assistance and TANF assistance, and the list goes on. So I think this is the right thing to do. I just think it's too much money. I think we could phase more in as needed, but I know that that's wishful thinking for me. The other piece, just while she brings this up, there is a component of direct assistance. Now, I didn't leave that out because I didn't want you to know it was in there. I just wish it wasn't in there. And let me tell you why. I think we need to make sure the most important thing we can do is to give peace of mind to families that have to stay home in terms of paid sick and family leave. The next most important thing we need to do is to make sure families, spouses, our fellow Americans have their jobs and they stay connected to their jobs. That's the lending liquidity for all sizes of businesses in every industry. And then we need the unemployment insurance program to be built out in its capacity to be able to handle the numbers that are coming and to plus that up in a way that takes a little of the sting and the pain and the suffering out of those first 3 months. But giving a check out to every American, $1,200, if you make $75,000 or less, or $150,000 or less as a married couple, I don't think that people have talked about that like it's a stimulus, like they're going to go out and spend that money. I don't believe that will happen, number one. Number two, I don't think we need to pay folks who have their jobs and have not had disruption in their employment and in their paycheck. I think I would have been open to compromise by saying you could provide direct assistance to those who've lost their job in transition from employment to unemployment insurance compensation. But that's part of the framework in the Senate bill that's coming in the next 24 hours. Okay. Again, *3 if you want to get in the queue. *6 if you would like to get our newsletter and stay informed. Okay. Dan Pope, oh my goodness, the mayor, my friend, and my proud local leader of the city of Lubbock is on the phone. So, Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah, good evening, Congressman. I wanted to make really 2 points. First and foremost, this is going to hurt us all. Public, private, young, old, those of us that have been at it a long time, and those of us that are just starting. I'm at the point in life where I got 2 kids that are trying to start their own, make their own way. And I think it's important that we as communities and as families work through this together. And I'm so thankful. My second point is I'm so thankful for your leadership and your responsiveness. Your team has been remarkable as you're available, and we lift you up, and we're thankful for that. And thanks for communicating, and thanks for representing West Texas so very well. All right, we appreciate you. Keep it up. Keep on keeping on. Godspeed to you.
Dan, thank you so much, man. That means a lot, and I treasure your friendship, and I'm grateful for your leadership. And I'm also feel as I've mentioned to you before, it's a special blessing to serve alongside of you, a city and a community in West Texas that we both loved so dearly, and to serve alongside somebody that I love and respect. So thank you, Dan, for those kind words. Okay, guys, let's go to the next caller from my hometown of Plainview. Go Bulldogs, Mr. Robert Guerra.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call, first of all.
You bet.
My question is, do you not think it's prudent to follow the Chinese model and try to lock everything down until we can get testing out, rather than follow the Italian model where the virus has spiraled out of control?
You know, I think we're trying to learn lessons, Robert, from South Korea, and there are lessons to be learned in every country throughout the world. Some of those are lessons of what not to do, but I think there's probably some positive things that many of the countries have put in place. Some were earlier to do it than others. Like South Korea had aggressive early diagnostics in place. They did the drive-through. They identified, they isolated. They then did a mapping of where these folks were, and then they began to communicate to those people and places where there might be a spread. It was pretty remarkable how they leveraged the information, the big data, but you know, they took a different path and used the WHO, World Health Organization testing framework, and they were able to get off the blocks quicker. And I've said before, I'm critical of how we got off the blocks with respect to testing, in the sense that, and I think some of this we're just going to have to look back at the right time and do a post-mortem and do an analysis on, you know, sort of the forensics on should we have done this and why didn't we get this out? And, you know, if it was the case that the FDA didn't reduce the regulatory requirements and cut through the red tape in time, that's a problem. If it was a infectious disease system that we have set up at the federal level that was more of a barrier than and a hindrance than a support system to facilitate testing, then that's something that has to be retooled. But no, I think that every country, you know, has a different scenario, different resources, different constraints. I think, like I said, the president's decision early on travel restrictions, that's proven to be to give us a little more time. I think getting the private sector involved in the development of the diagnostics and also the supply chain distribution system, I think that was the right call. But I think that we had a great economy. The fundamentals are good. I don't look at this package that we're considering in the Senate and considering in Congress to pass in the next 24 to 48 hours. I don't see it as a stimulus. I don't even like when people refer to it as a stimulus, and if the president or his administration thinks the direct assistance is a stimulus, I don't see it that way. And I wouldn't look. I would frame this as helping our families recover, helping our businesses and providing targeted and temporary relief to our businesses and getting us to a position where we can rebound, more quickly and, in a more seamless and expedited way. But no, I think we've managed it. Again, we'll look back and find where we zigged when we should have zagged and all that, but I think we have to recognize and keep in perspective that 80% of folks who contract the virus will have mild to no symptoms. And so there's a way to target the elderly and people with underlying conditions. There's a way to target communities that are more remote in their location. There's a way to target places that have a greater outbreak. I think we can be a little more strategic, and we can recalibrate the balance if the data suggests that we are in a place to do that. Right now, I think that Dan and Mayor Williams in Abilene and all of my local leaders, I think they've done what has been asked and what is needed, and that's abundance of precaution and an intense responsibility from the public to do the things that we mentioned with respect to hygiene, isolation from large groups, et cetera. We will get through this. This is the intense period. Hopefully in 2 to 3 weeks, if not sooner, we can start to recalibrate. Thank you for that. That's a good question. And I mean, I'm not telling you that there's no perfect answer to that, except let's let the data and the science and the facts dictate what we do. Ms. Della from Shallow Water. I think let's see here. Let's see. Miss Russell, not Miss Della. Miss Russell from Shallow Water. Mona.
Yes.
Mona, go ahead. You got the floor.
My question is, will anyone who receives any form of Social Security receive anything? Because I get a widow's pension monthly. I can't find the job. And now I really can't. It doesn't do any good to even look because no one can hire. Does that totally leave us out?
Well, the good news is there's no disruption in Social Security payments. Number one, unlike some of these local businesses and others who are employed by industries that have been waylaid by this, where they might be laid off potentially if they're not already laid off. There are many that are. So Social Security checks will not be disrupted in that way. And the direct assistance for those who make under $75,000, and many of our seniors on fixed income with Social Security qualify for this direct assistance. So there'll be a $1,200 check if this bill passes in its current form to you, Mona, and others who fit that eligibility criteria. So that's the short answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. Thanks for calling in. Next question from Mr. Thomas Mandry from Lubbock. Thomas, thanks for calling. Thomas, you there? Thomas, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, we just had we have just a little technical difficulty over here.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, thanks for your hard work. My, of course, gut feeling on this whole thing is the total price tag. Of course, just a West Texas person, it feels like it's way too high. Generally, it should only be for the people that absolutely had to shut down their businesses and those families impacted by that. But really my question is focused on a few days ago, just kind of watching the national news. It looked like we kind of had a deal that was just focused on this kind of stimulus package coronavirus, just laser focused. Then, at least on the news, it said Nancy Pelosi rolls into town and everything changes, and then all these additional things get potentially added, and I know it's kind of all negotiated, but my question is, what are the things in the bill now that you're not happy with, that you don't really like?
Thomas, that's a good point on process, and let me make a couple comments, because you said you think that this is, your gut is it's too much money. I can tell you right now, it's too much money, and I'm not trying to be cute, and I'm not trying to be overly political, but when you're negotiating with, when we tried to get monies to rebuild the military, for example, there were drastic cuts. We were losing more troops in training-related exercises than on the battlefield. I felt like that was life or death for our sons and daughters, and we were not going to send them into battle without having what they need to be safe and successful. Well, in negotiating that with Democrats, they were willing to let us put some money into that, but they wanted to expand monies in domestic programs. And I voted for a lot of bills that I thought were too expensive, that were spending money unnecessarily. I think our national debt is an issue of national security. In fact, I think it's the biggest long-term risk to this nation being exceptional. But my point on voting for that bill that invested in the military, I had to vote for something that had a higher price tag than I felt comfortable with. But, I could wait till it's perfect, which will be never, or we can get the money out, get it to use, and, I can't tell you how many businesses. I've had so many phone calls. I've been coming to work every day. I have a skeleton crew. We're working from home, but I'm coming up here every day, and I have lots of conference calls with small businesses and farmers and energy industry and hospital CEOs and pastors, and I agree with you. We shouldn't give money to people that don't need it. I mean, that's my big, and I do not like the direct assistance. Even talking to Mona about the 1,200, I mean, I think we need to use the mechanisms that are already in place and build that capacity to catch the people in the safety net of unemployment who fall into that, and we need to provide this liquidity in the form of loans that will be repaid. And the majority of this, Thomas, the majority of assistance, except for with some small businesses who, if they use it to keep their employees on the payroll, can convert some portion to a grant. The majority of this, and certainly all of the industry money, are loans. They are meant to be provided for the short term and paid back with interest. Now, to your question about what happened on the procedural issue, yeah, we were rocking along. We had a good framework. There were things I didn't like, but we were all focused on disaster assistance and recovery. And then Speaker Pelosi put her bill out there, and it had climate change policies, federalizing elections, and policies to take the state and local elections over. It had a bailout of the U.S. Postal Services, not saying that we don't need to provide support and reform, but we need reform there, not just bailout. That will just talk about moral hazard. That'll just continue the irresponsible operations of the Postal Service. There was a laundry list of things. My understanding is one of the things they were fighting for, that they negotiated most recently was $25 million for the Kennedy Center. Now, you know, I'm not disparaging a good play, and I'm not disparaging the performing arts, but this is no time to provide monies for the performing arts. This is a time for survival for our fellow Americans, and to get our country back up and running in the shortest time frame. So I'm with you. That's what that was all about. It was unfortunate because there was so much non-germane, irrelevant policy in her bill that it obviously it protracted the process, and it should have never happened. But look, we're where we are, and now we've got to deal with this as adults, as leaders, and we've got to make a decision about very imperfect set of policies, and determine on balance, is this set of resources going to help our country and our fellow American and our families that have suffered, and that's the kind of calculations that I'm engaging in as we speak. Okay, *3 if you have a question. Try to get through these a little quicker. I'm sorry, there's just so much, I guess, on my mind and heart too, as we try to get this right and get it out quickly. Dr. Albritton.
Thank you, Congressman, for the opportunity to participate in this meeting, and thank you for your leadership.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm a doctor with a small private practice here in Abilene, and I've got less than 10 employees. And we need to stay open because we need to take care of our patients, and I want to keep my employees working full-time. I don't want to have to lay them off. I understand that there's telemedicine and video conference available, but less than 5% of the patients that come to see us just don't fit into that category because that we need to do a physical examination of them. So my question is, what will the current bill in Congress do to help small private medical practices stay open, pay their employees, and cover their overhead?
You bet. Doctor, you're right. There's the healthcare side, which I didn't really cover with much specificity. We'll get things like the sequestration cuts for reimbursement waived and 20% add-on for COVID-19 consults and other related care. The telehealth expansion is significant, obviously, for rural providers and rural communities. That's a big deal because there are a lot of barriers to engaging in those consults via telemetry. But to your and then just while I'm going through this list, there are also things that will allow, for example, patients can go get a 90-day script instead of the 30 days. So they can get a prescription for their meds for a longer period of time, use co-pays for more things, including telehealth, HSA, flexibility. So if you have a health savings account, you can use that to pay for over-the-counter drugs where you couldn't do that. It was a preclusion in Obamacare. But your question is more of the how do you continue to operate, keep the frontline workers in the healthcare industry active and engaged and ready to do their part. The SBA loans are one piece. You're a small business. You're well under 500 employees. And to the extent you keep your employees, you can convert that you can forgive some of that loan or convert to a grant, same thing, for your payroll. And there's also $100 billion to shore up the healthcare infrastructure, not infrastructure, but healthcare system. But when I say infrastructure, it's people, it's equipment, it's the capacity. So there will be a number of ways that you can access that $100 billion for the health system nationwide. And I will be here with my team doing what we've been doing, and for a variety of constituents, making sure they know how to access those programs, and we will be fully engaged to do that. So let's make sure we follow up with Dr. Albritton, and when we have more details, again, I don't have all the details on that $100 billion, but that is specifically for the healthcare industry. There are monies for local governments, state governments. I'm looking at notes I took today on a conference call with the Republican conference, $4.5 billion for state and local. There's airport screening and airport infrastructure capacity. There's a number of things, but that's the best I can do for you, Dr. Albritton. But I think the SBA for business interruption and for temporary cash flow for your business, that's going to be the best program in my opinion for you. But let's follow up with him, make sure we get his contact information. Thanks, Dr. Albritton. Mr. Chance Britt.
Yes, sir. How are you doing, Brother Jodey?
I'm doing great, my brother. You doing okay?
Yes, sir. Just first and foremost, you know this, and you're always responsive. We are always constantly in prayer for you and the president and our many leaders. And we just want to thank you for your service and the diligency and timeless hours that you put into this. We know it's tiring, but it's all going to make America stronger, and we all see that, and it makes us a stronger country.
Chance, thank you, my friend, and you've been so encouraging. I can't tell you how many folks like Chance that just send me a text like Chance does and says, "We're praying for you. God's with us, and He's going to see us through it. He's going to give you strength and grace." And that's to know I've got brothers and sisters out there praying for me is just the greatest feeling in the world, and it makes not just me, but gives peace to my entire family. And I feel the energy, man. I feel the energy and the passion and the strength of the Lord. I'm just going to tell you. And I know it's not because I'm a good guy, it's because He's a good God, and because I have great friends and great members of the faith family praying for our country and praying for me. So, Chance, love you, buddy. Thanks for that kind word.
Thank you. Question is, so where do you see us going in the oil industry as far as getting stable and kind of balanced out as far as, where everybody's not panicking, stacking rigs, or we can actually, stay steady, with a $50, $60 barrel oil?
Yeah, look, I think a few things about that, Chance. Energy and ag, that's the lifeblood, man. We feed the world, we clothe the world, and we fuel this economy, and there's not a greater, more productive ag and energy center than West Texas for this nation. And it's struggling mostly because of the price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. And that dynamic probably did the most harm to distort the market and the price and to make it plummet. And then you get this pandemic on top of it. I think the president did the right thing to purchase the tens of millions of barrels of oil for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I will tell you the latest and greatest intel on this bill is that we did not get money in there to purchase more barrels of oil, which is unfortunate because we can replenish our strategic reserves at a very the lowest cost. And we can also stabilize prices for the energy industry, which we must maintain lest I have to go through that whole scenario where we depend on other countries for things that are critical to our economy and security. At the top of that list has got to be food and energy. And so I'm saddened to hear that that's not in the Senate bill. I heard that they had climate change reports for the airline industry and other things, the renewable energy tax credits, and so they made the trade to pull some of that out, and then the cost of that was not being able to give the resources to the president to purchase more of the oil, which again would satisfy two major objectives. We do have a provision that allows us to postpone the sale of those of that oil, which I think is a good thing. It's a smart thing. I don't think it's going to be a major support. We need to reduce regulations like the methane gas rule. We need to get rid of those things that are redundant and that are unnecessary and costing the industry, especially our independent oil and gas producers. These guys out in West Texas, the energy guys, I had a great call with them. They were from all over the district. And, I was so proud of them because they said, hey, we've seen the booms and we've seen the busts, and we know how to operate in every environment. And we will come back. This market will come back. The economy will come back. Prices will come back. And we will be energy dominant. And we will be on top because we know how to be efficient operators, and we know how to deploy technology. And when you have non-market economies, you have government-run economies, it hurts. They don't know how to produce. They don't know how to operate like we do. But we need to take on Saudi Arabia and Russia, and we need to deal with them nation to nation and figure out how to prevent them from jacking with the prices of oil long term. Thanks, Chance. Let me give a shout out to some folks. This will warm your hearts. It did mine. In the midst of this crisis, you've got Chief Jay Strong in Tide, Texas, taking the time that he would ordinarily spend patrolling the community that is virtually on lockdown, and redirecting some of his time and resources to bring food to people who are holed up, that are elderly, that can't get out, and bringing groceries. And that's what the local men and women in blue are doing in Thai America. They're volunteer teachers and administrators at Abilene Independent School District, providing a drive-through service for food support and assistance to families in need. I know my friends David Weaver and Glenn Cochran and folks in the nonprofit communities have stepped up, and Wiley Independent School Districts using robotics team and the robotics products that have been developed by their students to help serve the patients at Hendrick Hospital. Richard Kemp, who is a dear friend of mine, one of my favorite people that I met when I was campaigning. He'll be a friend for life. He bleeds West Texas. And this guy has provided Wi-Fi hotspots in rural areas, in small towns in West Texas that can't access the internet. Tonight, there are people who are in driveways and parking lots, and they're in their car and they're listening to this, and they can access this information from their representative, from their voice in Congress, because of the good work of West Texas Connect and Richard Kemp and his team. So, guys, it's just awesome. And the West Texas spirit, the American spirit, is on display for the entire world. We don't hunker down and curl up in a ball of fear. We do what we need to do. We help each other, and we make the sacrifices, and we respond. And I know that in the end, this is going to be another one of those chapters in the history of our country where people stepped up in all facets of our society and leaders at all levels to do what was necessary to get done. Now, let me tell you this, though. I'm just going to put this out there. It's one thing to borrow money at $1 trillion a year. That's our annual deficit. We have a national debt of $23 trillion. Folks, I didn't run to come spend more money. I came to rein in our spending and to get at reducing the debt and the deficit so that my children and your children could enjoy the prosperity and the freedoms of this country. Because if we ever have a sovereign debt crisis, then you cannot just go borrow and put it all back together. And so I will tell you, in these conversations, I've been talking to Senator Cornyn and to my leadership team and to my conference and to other members of Congress, and I've said we need to negotiate a forcing mechanism that forces Congress to take responsibility and deal with our terrible fiscal condition and deal with our national debt. Obviously, I didn't prevail. It's not in the bill, but I'm going to be very loud and obnoxious about that issue from going forward. And the president has spoken with me and others about his interest in doing that if he were to get a second term. I believe he will, and I'm going to make sure and hold him to that. I can tell you that. So, Mr. Brian Cooper from Lubbock, Texas.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call and taking the time to answer all these questions. I appreciate it.
You bet.
I get to look at this from two parts. I work in the oil field, my wife in the medical industry, so it's been an interesting month to say the least.
Oh, man.
I just have a quick two-part question. It's about how we are going to treat the people who actually contract COVID-19 on the more severe form, the 20%, and how we're going to protect our medical staff, the people who take care of that. For the first question, even if 20% of the people get it on the severe end, our hospitals currently aren't prepared to handle that number, neither by staff nor equipment to bring these people the care they need. For instance, between both hospitals, let's say they only have 200 ventilators and 1,000 cases are severe and need to be hospitalized. I mean, yeah, we're ready to go with, say, 240, but what happens if that number starts to grow? Right now we're lucky where we're at that we don't have that many cases, but I'm afraid that we are very ill-prepared if we do. And the second part was for protecting our actual medical staff. I know at our two major hospitals that I'm from, they're in desperate needs of things like viral transport swabs, N95 masks, proper PPE for nurses caring for COVID-19. And, you know, I've heard talk of enacting a bill to allow the private companies to make medical supplies. I don't know where we're at on that, but it would seem like something that even places who aren't working right now could do to help out with this local crisis that's going to become more of a problem as the cases rise.
Hey, Brian, I think all of that is legitimate in the concerns. I think that let me start with the capacity to take care of people that get really sick and need to be hospitalized and potentially on a ventilator in the extreme cases. You know, we are very fortunate at this point that with the numbers that we have, there are very few. I think there's only one or two that are hospitalized at this point. One person is very elderly. I say very. That's all relative, but they've made a comeback actually, and that's always encouraging, especially at that in that demographic where we know the symptoms can be most severe. You know, New York is hitting the very problem, the tipping point that you mentioned. I mean, they have tipped over to a point where they may be 100% over capacity or under capacity, and that is Brian, I'm glad you brought it up, because that is the very reason that Mayor Anthony Williams and Dan Pope and Barbara Penner and Leveland and all these local officials are trying to, I know it's frustrating, and I know that probably our kids are ready to get back to school and get away from their parents, quite frankly. But all of this is being done so we can manage this without the spike, without the volume that will inundate. So there's no good answer to what you're saying, except that's why we have to be extra careful, extra responsible, and that everybody's got to do their part. The masks and face shields and slippers and robes and all the various protective gear, I'm working with the governor's office. I'm working with Health and Human Services. I mean, we're going direct. I'm calling people at manufacturers, manufacturing facilities. We are doing everything to make sure that the supplies from the National Strategic Stockpile are being appropriately distributed to not just, there's a needs basis, which we all understand and respect as Americans who are hurting for those of our brothers and sisters in New York and California and Washington State. But I want to make sure that rural communities and my district has what it needs. And I think right now we have what we need. If it gets worse, there are scenarios where we wouldn't have what we need. But at that point, we will be prioritized by the governor. And quite frankly, every week there's more volume, more streamlined and expedited materials. And so the longer we manage this and keep it under that peak threshold and flatten that curve, the better it's going to be, because we're getting more volume of equipment and testing kits. So far we've been fortunate, but we are very engaged on that front, because the PPEs, as they call them, personal protective equipment, is critical for the front line, people on the front line like your wife. And we stand at the ready when things shift and when things, when there's shortages in our communities. And we've jumped in the middle of a lot of things in that regard. You mentioned there's a 20% plus up on COVID-related care, and there are other resources for our hospitals. The $100 billion that's in this bill, without being able to itemize all of that for you. By the way, some of that is protective gear. In fact, medical supplies, $16 billion. That's part of the appropriated money in this bill. That's medical supplies for the national stockpile that's being distributed. So I appreciate, Brian, what you're having to go through in the energy sector. Hang in there, keep the faith, and I certainly please pass along our well wishes and our prayers to your wife, who is definitely on the front lines. We need those folks. We've never needed them so badly than now. So thank you. Gina Phelps from the Big Country, the Key City in Abilene, Texas.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for taking my phone call. God bless you, and thank you, and President Trump, too, for all that y'all are doing to help us out. I've got a question, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
I've really actually got two. I would like to address the truck drivers that are filling our stores up with the stuff that we wouldn't get otherwise, but they're not able to have, creature comforts like going into restaurants and having a hot meal because they're in 18-wheelers and most of the restaurants are closed, and they can't get a 18-wheeler through a drive-through at Sonic or Chick-fil-A or something like that, and they got to go to a truck stop or have a porta potty to go to the restroom. Why can't there be some kind of areas more so for those truck drivers to have a hot meal and go to the restroom and stuff.
Listen, you mentioned something that actually Pastor Stubberfield mentioned at a pastor's conference call that I had with our faith leaders. He said we need to make sure that critical infrastructure includes the truck stops, the convenience stores that are critical for the petro and the human petro and the various things that come with the truck rest stops. So I agree with you. We followed up with the Secretary of Transportation. We talked to the Texas Transportation Department, and my understanding was that that was part of the critical infrastructures to keep those. Now, every business is, going to make decisions as private businesses with respect to what they feel like they can do or not do, and
Yes,
I know it's not I know it's part of the critical infrastructure, and it's not something that has been advised by the feds or state to shut down or to close up temporarily. But I will check back into that. But your point is well made, and I agree with you.
Yes, sir. And the other question that I had is, you know how rumors, they start out like a minnow, and by the time you get to it, it's a whale. What is the thing that they say, the martial law? Is it when people just go like Hurricane Katrina and they start looting? Is that when that's going to be a fact? I want to know, is that martial law in effect already in different states or different counties or anything? Do you know anything about that, or is it just hearsay?
It's just hearsay. Unfortunately, and I'm not suggesting that everything is Russia, but there's certainly disinformation campaign to frustrate our efforts, and some of that's just natural sort of conspiracy theory. There is no Marshall Plan. We're not doing a national shutdown. I think that the president has done a very good job of dividing and delegating the authorities that are vested in the state and local jurisdictions. That is, he has done the things that I think the federal government should be doing, and I think he's delegated to the states and the local governments the appropriate flexibilities to manage on the ground accordingly. One thing that Brian asked before you was about managing the supplies. I just want to say the Defense Procurement Act, there have been, I think all 50 states have engaged their state National Guards, and I know the military's been engaged to help. It's kind of an all hands on deck. But we're not in lockdown. We're not in martial law. The Defense Procurement Act is actually allowing us to do, and Brian, if you're listening, it's to manage the supply chain with a little more aggressive way, and where there's hoarding going on, we can intervene more aggressively with the law. If there's price gouging, we can intervene. This is not something we would do in a free market economy. We'd want to prevent monopolies, but we'd want free and fair trade and competition. But in this case, you can really, people can get gouged. The government certainly can be gouged. And it's appropriate that the president has declared the Defense Procurement Act and engaged to prevent gouging and to use and repurpose manufacturing facilities to produce products that are medically necessary and pertinent to the crisis at hand. So I know that that's something he's done, and I think it's absolutely appropriate. So thanks for that last question, and let's do one more question here. Remember, guys, *6 if you want to get a weekly newsletter, which will tell you all the goings on here, the issues that we're focused on for West Texas, and but there's also, you call my office, guys, if you need something. I can't tell you how many calls I've been taking up here, and my district team is great. Lindley Herring is there in Lubbock, Blair Schrader there in Abilene. We've got a great team, and they are service-minded folks, and they love West Texas. And in fact, Blair had a great job in Kentucky, I think. Was it Kentucky or Cincinnati? That's right. And he decided he didn't want to raise his family in Cincinnati. By golly, he wanted to come back to Abilene, and we're so proud that he's back, and he's just fired up every day to help serve our communities. Now, let's take this last question. Ms. Scott Peters. No, Mr. Scott Peters. You know, I get accused of being Mrs. Jodey Arrington all the time, but Scott Peters, that's pretty clear. It's a Mr.
Well, listen, Mrs. isn't the worst thing I would have been called even today, so I'll answer to either one.
Well, Scott Peters, the pride of Terry County.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And even more importantly than that, the father of a good friend of yours, Sophia Campa Peters, here in Brownfield.
Oh, my goodness.
I would be remiss. Yes, sir. I would be remiss if I didn't say hello for her. So,
give her a hug for me, man. She is special. Wow.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And on that note, we as a family continue to pray for you and for your colleagues on the Hill, and we are just so thankful for your representation, your passion for West Texas, and most of all for your godly servant's heart. And so we really do appreciate that. And Congressman, I've got actually 3 questions, and I'll get to them as quick as I can here. The first one is kind of a parliamentary question, and that is, will there be a quorum for this bill, or will it be a unanimous consent, or is there going to be a roll call vote? The second question about the bill itself, you had mentioned that some of these provisions and expansions to programs will expire at the end of the year, and I'm just curious if, if that is a sunset mechanism that is built into the bill, or will there be another vote required to kind of rein some of this back in when we're on the other side of all of this? And then my final question is a much broader question. You've answered some of it already, but I'm curious in your thoughts, what will we have learned? What lessons will we take away from all this when this summer the economy is booming again, we are healthy individually and as a nation again, and oil is back up to $50 or $60 a barrel, and we're poking holes again, and all the good stuff that we've enjoyed in the recent years? What lessons will we be able to look back on and say, this is what we learned from this? This is how we as a country, as a neighborhood, as a family, or as an individual have taken away from this so that we can prepare for, God forbid, the next time that we're faced with this kind of crisis.
Scott, I like how you're thinking about this summer, the big boom and the big recovery and the comeback, the American comeback from this unprecedented crisis. And your questions are just spot on. The procedural question, though, on whether we will have a unanimous consent or a voice vote or a roll call, that is to be determined. Now, let me tell you, I would prefer in a bill like this, where I'm very uncomfortable with the price tag, and I'm just telling everybody, I'm very uncomfortable with the direct payments. It is so hard for me to swallow this, but at the same time, if we dilly-dally and we debate, let's say I say I'm going to vote against it and we're going to send it back, and let's say we get enough to vote against it, we send it back and say, you guys have to keep working it out. Well, listen, I don't think we have time like we do in normal, and I don't know on the margin how much better it will get. I can tell you this. With the $2 trillion in there, the fact that we don't have election law sort of federalized election law reform, that we don't have climate change policies. And it's okay for us to debate that, and I think it's healthy for us to debate it. But that's not the purpose of this vehicle. And it shouldn't be loaded up like a Christmas tree with ideological and policy issues that are non-germane. And I think probably, Scott, you agree and others agree. But I'm glad that we have no multi-employer pension bailout, that we don't have expansion of union protections. This is not the place for that. So I can say that, I don't know how much, if we open it up for a roll call vote, we're not going to have amendments to it. So I think more than likely it's not going to be unanimous consent where people don't have to come here, although that's a discussion right now. Do we come back? Can we find a way? We have to pass a law. There's a lesson learned. We're telling everybody not to gather in groups more than 10 or 50 or 100 as this thing has progressed. Well, we're 435 members of Congress, and we would come back and gather in the chamber when we've been telling folks not to do that. I mean, I just think in the 21st century, surely there's a way in a national emergency that our leaders can make decisions and have controls in place without having to come back and risk the things that are risked in that regard. But there's a lesson learned, because that's not in place today. I mean, here in the 21st century, 2020, and we don't have that in place. We'd have to come back and vote for it. So I think ultimately it'll be a voice vote. That's my prediction, which means we can register our comments. We'll have debate, but it's not. Then it's just voice voted without having the roll call. That's just my prediction, Scott. Scott, one of the things that gives me the most consolation and the most comfort about some of the things that are in this bill, some of which I think are good and positive. It's just maybe a price tag that's too high, some of which I think is unnecessary and will not be effective and will be a waste of taxpayer money. All of these things will expire on their own. They don't require a vote. It's a sunset. Some of these provisions will expire in 3 months. Some when we take off the emergency declaration. Most of them will either be 3 months or the end of the year, and that's it. There's no permanent fixtures that I'm aware of. Now that's a big victory for limited government conservatives, because initially, for example, Pelosi and my colleagues on the Democrat side wanted to create a new entitlement program to pay for everyone's sick leave and family leave. Well, we have entitlement programs like Social Security that are already have solvency issues, and the Medicare Trust Fund, and I could go on and on. We need to provide incentives, especially to small businesses, to provide those tax incentives, maybe to provide those services. But in a strong economy, we're seeing an increase, or we were seeing an increase in benefits and including paid medical and family leave. We don't need to mandate it. We don't need a new entitlement program. And what that would do on the tax side with payroll taxes would make us go backwards from what we saw after the tax cuts. So I feel good about the fact that this is temporary, mostly targeted, and all time limited. So there you go. Last thing, lessons learned. I told you one of them. The biggest one is supply chain. There'll be time, and I would love that question, because we've got to learn from this, because we cannot shut our economy down, and we cannot lock this thing down like we've done in the future. It's too hard on the system. It leaves us too vulnerable. I think other nations are watching this and saying, wait a minute here. Look at how they've had to, but the supply chain and the dependence on single source countries and single source makers of very important products that are in the national security interest of our nation. That has to be changed. And I would say that President Trump has called out China, called out the need to make things in America again and put America manufacturers first and make sure that we have the capacity, not that we want to have isolationist policies, not that we want to have protectionist policies, but that we want to have the balanced policies in place to make sure that we can make food, make strategic metals, have the capacity to expand if we need to, but to make critical things in this country. I think that's smart, and I'm on the Trade Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction for Trade, Ways and Means, so I'm going to be working with the White House and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. This is a bipartisan issue and concern, and I'm looking forward to making that fix. I will also say this: there is lots of fragility in the health system in rural America. 40% or more of rural hospitals operate at a net loss. This is before the crisis. And I've been asked to co-chair with a Democrat a task force to solve that problem. I think there's some opportunities here to relax some things, to change some payment systems, to provide some of this expansion of health, telehealth. There are some things we can do even in the midst of this crisis that can bolster a more sustainable health system in rural America. Guys, I took a lot of time tonight, a lot of yammering from me, but man, there's just so much to cover. I'm proud to be up here on your behalf. I won't be up here forever. I don't want to be up here forever. I think we ought to have term limits. And but I'll tell you, for the time I get to be here on your behalf, I can tell you this: we're fighting and we're working, and we just want to make a difference for you and for the country. So thank you for your time. I'm sorry I couldn't get to everybody's call. So if you are in the queue, stay on the line and leave a message, and we will get back to you and cover your question or concern. It's been a long night for everybody. Can't thank you enough for being with me. As we always say, God bless, and go West Texas.